ongoing monitoring and the submission of data beyond simply the granting of planning permission and the implementation of that permission to build a scheme as granted. So it just feels like there's a requirement that's coming in through the back door there, especially because that, again, like I say, it has nothing to do with the energy hierarchy that I recognise from other plan policies elsewhere and guidance. Just in terms of water efficiency, in a paragraph 1117 of the justification, there's reference to the Humber River Basin District River Basin Management Plan, stating that implementing water efficiency measures is essential to prepare and be able to adapt to climate change and increase water demand in the future. It also cites local plan policies requiring 110 litres per second. That seems to be the justification for why this policy then requires 110 litres per person. But if you actually go to the Humber Management Plan, its references to the 110 litres is simply with them referring to what's happened elsewhere. It's not them saying it's a good idea. It's not a recommendation. It's not an intent for them to seek that as a level of water efficiency within local plans. They're just saying what local authorities have done elsewhere. So I don't think that that's actually proper justification for that requirement, especially because building regs themselves refers to 125 litres per person per day. And in referencing 110, that's only where there's optionals taken into account in building regs that are intended to be optional and not requirements. Again, the policy just seems to be going well beyond building regulations, which then doesn't appear to be consistent with the Deregulation Act. BREEAM. We have a fundamental problem with BREEAM in York, in that BREEAM is a holistic presentation, examination of the sustainability of development. It looks at everything from ecology to waste management during construction, the design of the actual buildings themselves, their location. There's a conflict in BREEAM to do with lighting. So if you're in a rural area, you lose points because you need lighting, yet if you're in an urban area, you've got lighting, so it seems a good thing because it's existing. There's so many problems with BREEAM in its own right. But in York, we have a particular problem in that a lot of the proposed allocations are actually in locations where achieving BREEAM Excellent is simply not possible. And I can say that because every application I've submitted on behalf of clients over the last few years relating to development on those allocations, we have simply not been able to gain sufficient points to achieve excellence. So Northminster, Elvington, Askham Bryan College, we can't get to excellence because there's simply not enough points available within the BREEAM assessment to be able to get to excellent. We can demonstrate very good, but not excellent at all. So this aspiration within the policy is simply unachievable. And every one of those planning permissions, we've actually had the council agree with us that it's unachievable, and then it's not being required. At the moment, it's BREEAM as well, it's actually finding it's a huge financial burden to development. And we know this because the likes of the hospital scheme that's just down the road, they actually put forward a case as to why it was so expensive and how money would be better spent on the hospital facilities. And again, BREEAM wasn't then required. I'm putting in applications at the moment across different local authority areas to also get rid of the BREEAM requirement, simply because it is such a financial burden on development at a time when all the costs are going up. I've one scheme in particular where it's in a similar situation, that it's outside of any urban area, it just happens to be an existing employment area, a very well long established one. We can achieve maximum points for energy efficiency, and to that point there aren't enough points available given the amount of energy efficiency measures and renewable technologies that have been installed. Given its location, we haven't got points available to accessibility. All the other points that are then available relate solely to writing reports to demonstrate certain measures and certain design aspects of the scheme. Simply writing reports or having to get updated versions of ecology reports, highways assessments, having to repeat the documentation that came alongside an application, but having to then have it updated because more than a year's passed, because most reports only last for a year, we're ending up where we're just collecting a drawer full of paper that helps obtain a certificate that actually delivers no tangible benefits at all, because we've actually achieved the maximum amount of possibilities and contributions towards the energy hierarchy that we might do through simply meeting building regulations for the fabric and also renewables and the like. And actually, the cost of the BREEAM means that for one developer, one client to have, they're having to forgo installing PV panels because they're having to put the money into BREEAM rather than putting the money into a PV system, because there aren't enough we don't need the PV panels to achieve any points towards the BREEAM, but the cost of the BREEAM is such that we can't now afford the PV. That's the most practical explanation as to how BREEAM, it can actually be counterproductive in the wrong circumstance. Yes, there's some circumstance where it might be useful, but for a lot of the allocations in York, it's simply impractical, costly, and achieves absolutely nothing towards achieving sustainable development.
Thank you. So, would you suggest that B, Roman 2, is removed? Therefore, what would you do with that?
I understand the objectives of trying to achieve sustainable development. I'm more than, it is what we should all be striving for. Personally, I'm building a passive house at the moment. I'm trying to obtain classic passive house on a house. So I absolutely get the fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve. But it's just this expectation of BREEAM excellence. I do think it is unachievable for most of York, given where the allocations are located. And also BREEAM is meant to actually be a scheme that is voluntary. So to put such an emphasis on a scheme that BRE themselves only see as voluntary rather than a requirement, I do think it's actually a misuse of that standard.
Yeah, so what would you do then?
I think it needs to be deleted, and if that's not a possibility because the local authority really feel the need that they do need a standard, then it does need to take into account the location requirements and the actual aspirations. So it needs to be more of an aim and an aspiration rather than a requirement, just because of the practicalities of dealing with it. Just one point as well about BREEAM, because it comes under criterion C, conversion of existing buildings and change of use. I've recently had an application for a listed building in York where we were asked to demonstrate BREEAM. The only reason we got anywhere close on the refurbishment, because it was refurbishment, was we would be building a garage and ancillary accommodation in the garden that we were installing solar panels on, and the solar system itself in isolation was the thing that demonstrated we could make all the savings and meet the policy requirement. The building itself, we couldn't do anything to, because the council would not let us actually make any of the alterations required to deal with bringing the energy efficiency up or meeting the BREEAM requirements. So again, I just don't feel BREEAM's the right way to go in terms of listed buildings or dealing with the overall requirement of trying to achieve sustainable development. So my preference would be just to remove it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to the council to address some of those points.
Well, let's take a few of them. First issue is the energy hierarchy. I don't accept that what we've included there is in any sense unorthodox or unusual. London Plan, sir, 2021, Policy SI2, Part A, you will see exactly the same words in terms of the energy hierarchy in the London Plan there. So this is not the council doing anything unusual in terms of the energy hierarchy. Mr. Gibbons might want to add something on the energy hierarchy at that point.
just the question about the be seen aspect of the energy hierarchy and its relevance. There's a known performance gap between modelled emissions performance from energy statements and as-built performance. This is a way of reducing that performance gap and making sure that developments meet the standards set in their energy statement as they are built.
And so that's something that can be addressed through a condition that will require the assessment after it's been built to ensure that the before and the after correlate. That is the energy hierarchy point. The only other part that was raised there was, well, is this a requirement by the back door? No, I don't accept that it is, because if you start from the beginning of 11.12b, the sustainability and energy statement should. So that is the tie back to the words of the policy. That was the first issue. The second issue is water efficiency. I think I can take this quite quickly. The submission that was made was around, as I understand it, the last sentence of paragraph 11.17, and that says it, i.e. the Humber River Basin Management Plan, also cites local plan policies requiring 110 litres per person per day in new homes as an effective measure for water demand management in the area. I don't actually think there's anything between us. The Humber Basin Management Plan cites that as an example of a measure which can be effective. That's what Ms Jutes' understanding of the management plan was. That is what this sentence is saying. So the council hasn't misunderstood that management plan. In my submission, what you heard from Ms Jutes was a misreading of that sentence of the supporting text. The reference back to the Deregulation Act that was made in the same submission, again, I repeat my earlier submission, that is an error in the submission being made to you because it is not yet in force. So that's water efficiency. That takes us then to BREEAM. The first thing to say is there was a number of points about essentially BREEAM itself. In our submission, that really goes to BREEAM as a standard. It doesn't go to the assessment of this policy unless it can be shown that those problems are of such a magnitude that is undeliverable. I'm afraid that's simply not the case. The council has had applications, major applications indeed, that have had no difficulties in achieving this. The University of York, for example, have brought forward their new environment building and has met the BREEAM excellent standard that this policy has in mind. So within the city of York, it is possible to achieve this. So all of those complaints about BREEAM simply fall away once that hurdle of deliverability has been passed. We are, however, happy to make a small modification to that part of the policy. So B2 in policy CC2, we will replicate the words not feasible or viable in that are in B1 in B2 to make clear that if you've got a specific case where there's a feasibility or viability issue, then that will be part of the assessment. So I'm happy to make that amendment, and that I think essentially deals with the vast majority of the points made under the issue of BREEAM. The only other thing to highlight, of course, is that it is BREEAM excellent or equivalent. There are other standards, some of which may be more appropriate on the facts of a particular development having regard to its location. If that's the case, then the developer can point to an alternative standard and bring that forward with a specific locational justification. And so there's sufficient flexibility in the policy as it's worded, subject to that amendment that I have just suggested. I think that deals with the points made.
Thank you. Is there anything else on that we have to cover? I think we've gone over that in quite extensively, and I've heard both sides. Can I just ask one thing before I think it's probably time for a break? The bit under C that deals with proposals relating to heritage assets should demonstrate the maximum BREEAM score that can be achieved whilst conserving the significance of the asset. I wonder whether conserving is the right word to use there, whether, or might some improvements to the energy efficiency of a listed building be balanced as a benefit against perhaps a small impact on significance? Because I wonder if you say significance has to be conserved, you can't then do anything to that building that would harm.
Unless you adopt an internal balancer. But I don't. I've made many submissions in front of you on that issue already. Perhaps that's a slightly cheeky response. I totally understand the point. There are examples. I mean, there are PV panels near the Minster, and the council is well used to balancing those considerations. Leave that one with us. We'll consider whether we want to clarify the wording.
Happy to leave that with you. It's not a major point. I'm going to suggest we have a break. Sorry, Professor May.
Well, so can I just check? Are you moving away from policy CC2 after the break? Because I had got a very different point. We spent a lot of time on the standards for new buildings. I welcome the opportunity either now or immediately after the break to make that point.
Let's deal with that immediately after the break then. I think it's probably time. I've got coming up to 25 to 4, so let's resume at 10 to. Thanks everyone. Until then.